It made landfall as a Category 4 storm with maximum sustained winds near 250 kilometers per hour. Hurricane Iota is considered to have been the strongest storm to hit Nicaragua in the country's history. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. The reach of Iota was massive. Sea swells were witnessed as far north as Mexico's Yucatán Peninsula, as far east as Jamaica, and as far south as Colombia. This day in weather history. The timing of a hurricane is never optimal, but it is infinitely made worse when it follows hot on the heels of a punishing storm that people are still recovering from, you see. Hurricane Iota made landfall only 25 kilometers south of where Hurricane Eta had struck earlier. And with Iota being considered the worst of its kind, this had all the makings of a weather event that would likely scar this region for generations. In all, more than 400,000 people in Nicaragua were affected by the storm. In the hours and then days that followed, President Iván Duque would say that the island's infrastructure had been completely wiped out. Here is the story of this beast. Iota was the 31st and final tropical cyclone of that season. It was also the 30th named storm, 14th hurricane, and record-tying 7th major hurricane of the record-breaking 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. Opening as a tropical wave, it moved into the eastern Caribbean on November 10th. By the 13th, it developed into a tropical depression north of Colombia, and then strengthened into a tropical storm only 6 hours later. It would soon undergo what is called explosive intensification and then hit as a Category 4 storm with maximum sustained winds, as I mentioned earlier, near 250 kilometers per hour. But here's the thing. Just before it hit, it was downgraded to Cat 4 from Cat 5. Where was it at Cat 5? It was in the islands of San Andres and Providencia, just northwest of Colombia's mainland, where they, for the first time in their recorded history, suffered the impact of the strongest category strength hurricane you can get, a Category 5. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, but oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. The hurricane had out ahead of it some very, very heavy rain, and as a result, Honduras and large portions of Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Belize were drowned in up to 760 millimeters of rain, while areas from El Salvador to Panama saw anywhere up to 300 millimeters. It was the rain that still would lead to significant life-threatening flash flooding and river flooding, along with mudslides in areas of higher terrain. And if you know anything about the topography of Central America, it's basically all mountainous. No one was spared disaster. Now back to the Eta effect. Those hit directly by Iota, as I mentioned earlier, were still recovering from Hurricane Eta. It is important to note that Eta also made landfall as a Category 4 storm, and it was only 2 weeks ago that it happened on November 3rd. The associated torrential rains caused by Eta led to mudslides and massive flooding, and there were mass fatalities and many more that continued missing throughout all of the affected Central America region. Those mudslides caused extensive damage and led to too many deaths. It was said that a total of 67 people were killed due to Iota throughout the Central American path it took. These deaths were recorded as at least 28 in Nicaragua, 16 in Honduras, spread among the rest of the country. A preliminary estimate pegged the damage in Nicaragua alone at $564 million, while total damage estimates for the hurricane overall was close to $1.5 billion. It was tragic when Iota moved in and took over on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is November 17th, and this is easily one of my favorite weather stories I have brought to this podcast. It involves an American city that I have grown up nearby for most of my life and therefore grown to love as my own. Buffalo, New York. Tomorrow on this day was the scene of the Great Buffalo Blizzard of 2014. Television and radio hosts who were on the air reporting on the story to keep people informed and safe had to stay the night. That's all tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.